The voice.
The heart.
The soul of the Cayman Islands.
Live from Radio Cayman Studio, this is
Money Sense, bringing an informed financial perspective to the Cayman community.
A very good morning and warm welcome to Money Sense. I'm Simon Caudry and I'm delighted to be joined once again by Minister Andre Ebanks. Good morning, Minister.
Good morning to you, Simon. Good morning to the Cayman Islands listening public and Caymanians overseas.
And Minister of Financial Services, Minister of Commerce and also Deputy Premier. So more titles to add after your name.
Just doing a job.
There we go. Well, look, you've been on your travels.
I have.
And I think we'd like to know what you've been doing on those travels, because it's been in places that often haven't been visited by people from the Cayman Islands in government capacity. So tell us a little bit about what you have been up to.
I appreciate the question. Thank you very much. It has been a very good, solid, in my opinion, value to the Cayman Islands to promote financial services, other initiatives, now that we had successfully exited the FATF grey list, following that
For the time being.
the EU AML list, and also the UK's high risk list.
Yeah.
And that has, as far as I can see, generated a number of activities, transactions that are occurring because the jurisdiction has regained its regulatory footing. I know when you say places that haven't been visited lately, you're referring to what you must have seen in the press, that my most recent trip was Hong Kong and Tokyo.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
But just a couple of weeks past that, just to mention it, because we haven't, I think, spoken in a few months.
It's been a few months, indeed. You've been travelling, so we haven't been able to catch you.
Yes, it was New York and Washington, D.C. prior to that. And again, Cayman Finance, I take my hat off, had engaged the private sector in New York. A number of folks were part of the Cayman delegation, but they created a roundtable in New York with New York financial services stakeholders. Again, they were very appreciative of the country's efforts to be removed from these lists. They're starting to see activity from their clients in terms of financial transactions that are now reoccurring in Cayman because of the confidence gained back in the jurisdiction. So that was not only good to hear and reassuring, but also, which I know we'll come on to, as you think about the strategy for the next round of the FATF, which I'm sure you're burning to ask. In addition to that, it was a very, very solid set of engagement in Washington, D.C., dealing with not just a number of members of Congress, both in the House and in the Senate, but also relevant departments like Treasury, U.S. Treasury. Just completely open dialogue, very positive, a new outlook for the Cayman Islands, from a regulatory standpoint, from a tax standpoint. So very heartening trip. And then to come on to answer to your question directly, the last trip was to Hong Kong and Tokyo. I think, if I'm not mistaken, memory serves, in this capacity as Minister for Financial Services, I think that might have been my third trip to Hong Kong, because it's a very important financial center where we have obviously a number of firms that have offices there. The big four accounting firms and some of the other accounting firms also have offices there and utilize Cayman Islands products. So that is well-tread ground. But my mind turned slightly to Tokyo. There was a local financial services conference where a contingent from Asia came, which again speaks to the brand of the Cayman Islands, that they're willing to travel from Asia to come to Cayman for a conference.
It's not an easy journey.
It's not an easy journey
Not
to
at
come
all.
to a conference here when they don't have to.
Yeah.
And out of the Asia contingent that was there, a number of them said, Minister, a number of Cayman Islands ministers over the years visit Hong Kong quite frequently for obvious reasons, the reasons I just said. But we really would like you to take a look at Tokyo. You might be surprised at the level of utilization of Cayman Islands products, particularly the unit trust structure under the Armed Mutual Funds Act and trust law, and be struck by the recognition of the brand, the recognition of the regulatory framework, and what more might occur in the future. I was persuaded by that and thought that that served as a pretty good business case to attend. And so said, so done. I'll come on to Hong Kong in a minute, but to stay on to Tokyo, it was a pleasant surprise to see not just public officials in the public sector, but also private sector institutions describe in great detail their knowledge of our financial services system, the knowledge of the products, the respect for the products, the respect for the regulator, the respect for the private sector practitioners locally. And because I believe there's a bit of a buzz now economically in Japan.
Finally, after too many decades.
And finding its sort of financial services footing.
Yeah.
A number of stakeholders, both in the public sector and the private sector, said, we're going to start to put on conferences. We're going to start to generate more attention. Would you be willing to come back out again? And when I came home and talked to the financial services ministry, some members of industry, and looked at the numbers, it's worth maybe another promotional effort there, hopefully before the end of the year.
When you go on these trips, I think you've said that they've all been very productive. You've had good meetings with people who have had interest in Cayman. Do you ever worry that people only want to tell you the positive things and that people aren't sharing with you the frustrations they may have of Cayman? Do you ever hear frustrations from any of these potential stakeholders or actual stakeholders?
You hear both, as you would hear locally. So you would hear whether or not another regulation is coming out and what else should they look for. What do I see coming down the pipe from the FATF or the EU? But what's interesting about the conversations, which gives you a global perspective, is that in the other jurisdictions they do business, they're seeing the same thing because it's a global movement in terms of the increase of regulation. It's not isolated to Cayman. So they do always end with, but at the same time, we have structures in XYZ jurisdiction, and we're feeling it there too, which I think is adding to compliance cost and the value of compliance officers, both in the public and private sector globally.
Yeah, I guess the challenge is that Cayman has historically been a successful jurisdiction because of its ability to be a compliant jurisdiction, although some international parties sort of have considered us non-compliant over the years. But it's been compliant because of its ability to have a somewhat streamlined approach without some of the bureaucracy that often comes with the bigger countries. And do you ever get the sense or the anxiety or the concern that we might be losing that ability to be nimble, that ability to be streamlined and less bureaucratic?
I didn't hear that so much on these trips. Mm-hmm. I did hear what I mentioned, what's coming next, what do we need to look out for. But I did hear a level of acceptance that this is the way the world is going. If you don't do that, the risk to us is greater when you're on a list. So although we might grumble a few pain points of going through the process, now having seen the consequence of being on the list, you do have to say to yourself, we can understand now why that might be worth it.
We'll come to the pain points of being on lists and off lists and what the next set of lists might be. But going back to Asia, you've made a start. So this is I think you said before the show, your third time you visited Hong Kong, and first time in Tokyo in this capacity. Future plans then what's the Cayman Islands government's plans in terms of solidifying and building off these first steps in terms of being able to represent Cayman more cohesively, more persuasively? What are the next steps then?
So you are now tapping into my inner thoughts on the flight back.
When the rest of us are sleeping, you're trying to have thoughts.
So, number one, in terms of Asia specifically, I'm pleased to announce that there will be the grand opening of our Cayman Islands government office in Asia, which will be located in Singapore this June. Okay. The exact date, I'll have it for you because I believe our outstanding Caymanian representative to Asia is beginning to circulate the invitation. It shall be.
Is this breaking news? Is this money
Wait
sense
for it.
Breaking news for the first time ever?
This is the respect I have for you, Simon, and your show. Wednesday, 26th of June, 2024, 6:30 to 8:30, Cayman Islands office in Asia, invited to the grand opening in Singapore.
Excellent.
dress code business casual.
Well, that rules me out then, because I've never understood what business casual means.
So our representative and the ministry here will begin to distribute invitations.
Is
Both
this
the firms
going to be a
locally.
long... I don't want to be a little controversial, but we've had some incidences where we set up offices in jurisdictions and they've closed down not long after. Is this there's a long-term plan for this one, is there?
As far as I'm concerned, yes.
Okay, good.
Because it ties into the question that you're asking me in terms of the future plan. So the plan is, and I did mention this to a number of stakeholders in Hong Kong who thought, well, Hong Kong has been doing business with Cayman at a greater degree for a longer period of time. Why is the office there? Not there in Hong Kong. But Singapore offers a platform where we may be less known. So, for example, let's take North America. You could look at me and say, well, why wouldn't the Cayman Islands office be in New York rather than D.C.? But again, south of New York is maybe where we're less known, where a lot of policy is there. Similar rationale for Asia, where we're well established in terms of our products and regulatory framework in Hong Kong, not so much in Singapore, where there's beginning to generate a number of activity, and as well as other southern countries of Asia. So part of the future plan of promotion is other countries, South Korea, Vietnam, that we're beginning to see some uptake in Cayman Islands products to get the rep to be moving around. So I've said in conferences, and I've pointed the representative Jean DaCosta out to say, you will not be a slave to Singapore. Your job is to move around the entire region to be able to promote our products, what's happening, not what's on offer now, our current offerings, what's potentially new offerings and new products in the future, what's happening from a regulatory framework in the future, and what ideas do they have in terms of how we could continue to enhance our overall framework.
I presume the goal is to get commitment or collaboration, perhaps is the right word, with the private sector, to have them co-event things with the representative out there and partner on promotional activity. Is that the plan?
That's not just the plan. That's already occurring. So in those prior trips that you mentioned, because we've had a prior trip to Singapore where we partner with Cayman Finance. So it's continuing that exact same model.
So if there are people who are listening to this show who have subsidiaries, head offices or whatever in those jurisdictions, they should really start to be reaching out to the ministry and say, hey, we'd like to collaborate, let us know, or we'd love to attend this event and be a partner to help promote Cayman. That's what you're looking for, in fact.
Yes, but however, I would say that I think that in a way has started. Mm-hmm. So the rep has already started to engage firms there. We had a similar roundtable discussion in Hong Kong with a number of the Cayman Islands law firms and counterpart accounting firms that were there to tell them that this was happening. We didn't have the precise date yet, but I thought it would be somewhere in June. So that effort is happening, yes, and I think it'll continue to happen. So once the invitation will go out to Cayman Finance, we'll see if folks here would be willing to go. I'm sure they would. If not, I think they'd send their counterparts that have offices, that have members have offices there. The one sad point for the government is that I unfortunately won't be able to attend in person, which I am very sorrowful about. Parliament was called for the week of the 24th of June. MP follows my name of Andre Ebanks now. First duty is to Parliament. So I'll attend by the video conference message. And a number of other ministers were going to come along with me. I also intended to invite the leader of the opposition, because this is a proud moment for the Cayman Islands. It's not just the sitting government, but all of us should be proud that the Cayman flag is flying in another jurisdiction and the Caymanian is taking up the post in Asia. But we can do a subsequent trip.
Well, I guess you also, to your point about inviting the leader of opposition, there could be a change of party or change of government at some point in elections, and you want to ensure that something like this, which represents Cayman, isn't a party political thing. It's a government, it's a island.
It's a country. Yeah. It's a country achievement.
Yeah. Okay, look, we're going to take a quick break and we'll rejoin you and continue this conversation on the Cayman Islands Financial Services.
The Ministry of Education and the Passport and Corporate Services Office remind all students traveling to and from school overseas to ensure their passports are valid for both travel and entry into their destination country. Passports should be renewed at least 10 weeks before departure, and any necessary student visas must be obtained. For passport services, contact the Passport and Corporate Services Office at 649-7678. For Ministry of Education Education scholarship inquiries, contact scholarships@gov.ky. This message is brought to you by the Ministry of Education and the Passport and Corporate Services Office.
Oh, when the saints go marching in.
The Christian Association of Civics is pleased to announce that the March for Jesus will be taking place in Cayman Brack, 22nd of June 2024. Visit christian.ky for more information or call or WhatsApp 929-6657. Cayman Brack, get your shoes ready. It's the March for Jesus happening on June 22nd.
Oh, Lord, I long to be in that number when the saints go marching in.
This is
Money Sense, bringing an informed financial perspective to the Cayman community. Brought to you by the CFA Society Cayman Islands.
And now, more Money Sense.
Welcome back to Money Sense, and we're here with the Minister of Financial Services and Deputy Premier, Mr. Andre Ebanks. Before the break, we talked about some of your travels in Asia and some of the things that you're doing and the government is doing to try and promote the Cayman Islands and trying to promote the financial services sector of the Cayman Islands. You've been having a huge number of meetings with various people who use Cayman. So perhaps you could give us sort of a selection of the feedback that you've been getting. What sort of industry comments you've been receiving? What sort of are you hearing things as to direction you want financial services regulation or financial services rules, whatever it might be, to go? What are you hearing from participants in this industry?
So while we segue from Asia, one of the things I think touched them was just the fact of the government making the effort to thank them for their business. That went a huge way in terms of industry feedback when I was there. Thank you for taking your time to come this way, this far part of the world, to thank us for our business, because we really do appreciate the jurisdiction of this product. So that was pretty major feedback. Following on from that, and probably more directly to the root of your question, since exiting the AML lists, all three of the major ones, everywhere that I go in terms of financial services, conferences, gatherings, roundtable discussions here and abroad, is, wow, Minister, I don't think you have any idea how the lights came back on once you exited the list. We started to hear from clients we hadn't heard from in a while. We've had clients that we had heard from them, but their activity wasn't at the same level. It was a complete shift, which is gratifying to hear. But my next question is, okay, for my mind, I've already moved past that. I'm looking at what would be next. What would you like to see us do to maintain this and also exceed it? We've had discussions with the Financial Services Legislative Committee about new products. So, for example, or modifications to attract new business. So, for example, right now, published on the Gazette website is an amendment to the Perpetuities Act to relax the rule against perpetuities. It's a sort of a narrow area, so I don't want to bore the entire audience. Put it this way. It allows flexibility to trust practitioners to generate more business and brings us in line with a number of other jurisdictions in the trust practice to give that flexibility. Why that becomes important when I attended the STEP conference is because we're starting to see a real buzz of major family offices that would like to be either headquartered in Cayman or managed from Cayman. And having that relaxation of that rule
For generational
planning purposes says, like, Minister, that would really, again, be another notch on the Cayman Islands belt. So that's on the cards. That's published, and I hope to present that bill in Parliament the same week that I'm not able to go to the Singapore office, the Asia office opening in Singapore, the 24th of June, that week, or however long we're in Parliament. The other thing that is coming up more and more often is the attraction of reinsurance. There historically has, and I shouldn't understate this, been reinsurance business on island. So it's not new.
Yeah. But the majority has always historically been in Bermuda.
So our cutting edge area historically has been investment funds. Main focus and cutting edge area for Bermuda has historically been reinsurance. although each country does both. But for a variety of reasons, there seems to be a uptick in interest in utilizing Cayman. So we are talking to stakeholders of any amendments that we might need to make to continue to attract, what additional resources the regulator may need to be able to process applications, because it's a highly regulated industry, so it fits in with our regulatory profile. It has real boots and substance on the ground. It becomes part of the community. It becomes part of educational efforts, charitable efforts. It really would, a uplift in that area really would complement the existing financial services offering.
It's funny because I work in the investment funds industry, and you try to sometimes say, how does the investment fund industry benefit a school teacher, or how does the investment fund industry benefit a baker or a butcher, whatever it might be? And sometimes it's difficult to draw the exact link. But the reinsurance industry could genuinely, with more reinsurers familiar with what happens in Cayman, could genuinely result in lower house insurance premiums because there are more capacity in the market if they're more familiar. So it could have a real benefit to every single person who lives, works and owns property or cars and such like here, just couldn't it?
Funny you should raise that, unprompted by me. I put that question to the existing reinsurance association. I'm not expecting folks, when I put the question to them, not expecting miracles overnight, but isn't this one of the potential local ancillary benefits that if some of these larger reinsurers' houses begin to be the headquartered or have a foothold in Cayman, should they be looking at some of the existing issues that could help the community?
Yeah. So let's take a slight turn, maybe a sharp turn, but I want to talk about things that are in our future which may not be as attractive to everyone as potential new activity and new business. And that means upcoming regulations, not regulations necessarily that we are wanting to pass, but perhaps stuff that we're being obliged to pass. So we've gone off all the grey lists. We're now on whatever the non-grey list is called, a white list perhaps, I suppose. But there are future steps that we are still going to have to follow. So the FATF has said we have to do additional things, one of which is beneficial ownership. We have to have more transparency as to who owns partnerships and such like. Do you ever worry that we're sort of not competing on a level footing with international peers in this respect? So we're being asked to do so many things here for transparency, and then you go to the EU and there's a ruling to say, well, you can't do it for GDPR reasons. You go to the US and they say it's undemocratic, it's unconstitutional to have public information. And then there's Cayman being told by the UK, you must do it. Who cares?
So let's unpack a lot of that, because there's a blending between different asks in the question. Starting with the FATF, that is an international standard, the international standard setter. So they are asking everyone to do all of the standards. So we're not isolated in that. Where it can become tailored is that each jurisdiction that is assessed has different composition of financial services. So therefore, jurisdictions that are strong financial centers will have a certain level of attention for certain standards than, say, a jurisdiction that doesn't have much financial services, that, say, only had banking. Mm-hmm. So the more sophisticated you are, the more the standards may apply to you, which is a good thing. It's a mark of our success. So in that context, it's very difficult to argue to say, well, wait a second, are we being treated somehow differently? In fact, what I would tell you is one of my strongest takeaways from the gray listing removal process was a recognition during the process that, wait a minute, it isn't their job to know us. It's my job to listen and understand that it's a global regulatory fence that they're building to keep out bad actors. And when you have a sophisticated jurisdiction that has a level of business you do, you have an obligation to help with your part of the fence to make sure it's strong to keep out bad actors, which is in the country's interest, because one story of one scandal here sets back the reputation. So as far as I'm concerned, the methodology going forward is to read and understand the standards that may be coming down the pipeline when the FATF fifth round begins in 2027. Work backwards from there of what we can see the proposed changes are, and not wait until the 11th hour to change them and scramble before the assessors get here. It's to take a long view and work backwards and chip away at those. So by the time the assessors get here, the private sector has had a sufficient, you don't have the ideal lead time, but sufficient lead time to make the adjustments so that we stay ahead rather than ending up on the list again.
So, let's presume I take that point. One of the things the industry will say is, okay, we've got a lot of work ahead of us, a lot of cost ahead of us. The government's introducing new rules being prescribed for the valid reasons that you put forward. You're going to make us follow these new paths, and we all want to get to the place where we remain off the grey list. It would be somewhat irrational to say, I'd like to be on a grey list. That's not a logical thing to want to do.
I certainly never want to go back to that.
Yeah. So everyone would like to stay off a grey list. But the path to get there takes many forms, and everyone is seeing, well, we see what the new rules and regulations require of us. Give us a chance to put those into practice. Or are you going to say, from the day we introduce the new rules and regulations, enforcement and fines and penalties start on that day? That's the concern I think sometimes industry has. There's a expectation to do things right, and everyone wants to, but it takes time to get there. So at what point does enforcement, fines and penalties all kick in?
So this is exactly why I'd like us to take the long view. So on the last public holiday of Discovery Day, all of the stakeholders, main stakeholders in FATF planning gathered for a strategy session that included an element of the private sector, because there are quasi-regulators like, say, the Accountants Association and also the Legal Practitioners Association, to say all of us have to come to grips with this, because it's not any easier because you're a public sector officer. They have to grapple with the rules too and be able to understand that they're applying them fairly. What we have to do as a country is analyze the rules of where the endpoint is and plot out a timeline that would give industry, to answer your question, a period in which they can adjust to the rules before they're turned on and understand.
Become familiar with them
before commencement.
Make mistakes, but be able to correct them. Because everyone's going to make mistakes on the time of getting to that stage.
And mistakes could happen after commencement, but as long as there's hopefully adequate time prior to commencement to understand what's happening, so when a commencement occurs, the goal would be for the overwhelming majority to understand the rules, have had time to make as much adjustments as they can. So what has, I think, occurred previously, where when there's such a sharp turn so close to the assessment, there's very little wiggle room for both the public sector and the private sector. It's a panic moment. And let's not forget, in terms of some of the changes that are coming down the pipeline between rounds, and we're going into the 5th round of the FATF, they've been about a decade apart. They're now analyzing whether or not those rounds should be shortened to 6 to 7 years. So it's not going to get any easier for anyone. My suggestion, and I think the Attorney General, who is the chair of the Anti-Money Laundering Committee, is let's get ahead of this.
So I think everyone's probably in favour of getting ahead of it. Is there a commitment, I suppose, to not have the penalising of firms, the monetary penalties, on day zero, so that there is a 6, 9, 12, whatever that lag period is? Is that something that the government can get comfortable with?
I think the approach is, prior to the new rules commencing that would have the new enforcement, is not commencing that before there's been a longer lead time of consultation, so that on commencement, when the penalties would kick in, the sanctions would kick in, there should have been an educational period of what that looks like, so you can make the adjustments prior to commencement.
Okay. We are, as always, out of time, and I've got
already.
I think I'm on question 4 of possibly 40, but it's been an absolute pleasure having you and joining us this morning. I think one of the things before the show, when we were talking about Asia, is just the number of people who have clients in that marketplace who would very much welcome the government's, would very much be welcoming helping support government in terms of promoting the island and the jurisdiction. So I think if there are people who are listening who have clients there who want to be part of this endeavour, get in contact with the ministry and just make yourself available to promote, right?
Make myself available, and we also as a ministry plan to have consultative sessions in our own event. which goes to your prior question in terms of making sure that we're as transparent as possible, that we have to grapple with these new rules too.
Yeah.
We have to do it together as a country.
Yeah. Otherwise, we will sink or swim together.
Swim is the preference.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There we go. Well, look, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for joining us. Money Sense is available for viewing on the CFA Society Cayman Islands webpage on YouTube. Simply type in Money Sense Cayman onto YouTube and you'll find us. With all that said, it remains for me to simply thank all of our listeners for tuning in, devoting some of your morning to our show. And please do tune in again to Money Sense in 2 weeks' time. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon, and thank you, Cayman.